want to welcome you all to the Harlem Lacrosse Annual Benefit. It's fantastic that you're all here in support. I'm going to need some light up here. In support of this tremendous organization and in support of the now 1,500 kids in 5 cities across America that the organization serves. Pretty incredible. Harlem Lacrosse, as most of you know, is not just bringing lacrosse into the lives of kids who not very long ago might never have touched a stick, but it's also enabling these kids to outperform their peers in many post-high school academic metrics, preparing them for the larger playing fields that lie ahead. Doubtless, a question from some of you for me tonight may well be, what are you doing here? It's a reasonable question, so I'll explain. So there's a quote about actors which is attributed to Marlon Brando, and it says that an actor is a guy who, if you ain't talking about him, he ain't listening. So I'll talk about myself a little, so that I'll listen. My introduction to lacrosse began almost 50 years ago now, which is strange because I'm not even that old, and it began in a way, this lacrosse journey, through football, which I started playing at the age of 8 in a league in Washington, D.C., not entirely dissimilar to Harlem Lacrosse, at least in terms of the types of kids who participated. I played in the Metropolitan Police Boys Club League, off-duty cops serving as coaches for the dozen or so teams situated across the city. And I lived in Southeast D.C., in a pretty solidly middle-class and predominantly black neighborhood. But I attended a tiny private school in Southeast that was run by 2 older women, one English, one German, I mean super strict. And they were holdovers from the years prior to the Martin Luther King assassination riots when the neighborhood had been predominantly white. And they saw to it that we students were taught we were taught, for example, German and French, among other things, from our youngest days. It was a great little school. My father had passed away when I was a toddler, and so I was raised by my mom, who was a lawyer for the federal government, and my aunt, an administrative nurse for a local federal hospital. And a friend of my mom's recognized my early love for football and took me to one of the police boys clubs to join the team, number 2 boys club. It was in a fairly tough section of town, not too far from my neighborhood. We used to practice on a small, semi-grassy, semi-dirt and rock, triangular median strip in the middle of traffic that was barely big enough to hold us all, and we never practiced in gear. And when we had a game, we'd have to strip out of our shoulder pads and helmet and hand those over to a player on an older team for him to wear during the game that followed ours. We won not one game that year. We were not well resourced. We scored not one touchdown, not 1 point. It was a rough season. And normally our games were played on the field of one of DC's public high schools. But middle of the season, one Saturday morning, we hopped on a yellow school bus, headed up Northwest DC to play number 8 boys club. And number 8 was the only team in the league that was predominantly white. You have to remember, back then, DC was decidedly chocolate city back then. And number 8 Boys Club was situated in a section of the city that was largely segregated in that way and largely affluent. And so as the bus rolled up to the field where the game was to be played, our collective jaws dropped. The field was lush grass, and no rocks, no dirt, encircled by a track, a row of clay tennis courts behind a fence to one side, a nicely manicured baseball diamond on the other, a second field at its far end, all nestled within the shadow of the Washington National Cathedral, which towered above, high on a hill. I'd never seen before such a place for kids to play football. Well, we lost that game, of course, like all the others. But after the game, I asked my mom, "What is this place?" She said, "St. Albans School." I said to her, "I want to be at this place." She said to me, "Well, if it's good enough for the Kennedys, it's good enough for you." That was my mom. So the next year I applied, and I took the admissions test, and I was accepted into the school. And of course, signed up to play football that first fall. And as it turns out, sixth grade football coach was also the varsity lacrosse coach. He said, "Jeff Wright, you should come out and play lacrosse in the spring." So I did, and fell in love with the game and everything about it from the start. What's not to love about a game in which you can legally and more or less relentlessly thwack someone with a stick? I used to love everything about it. I used to love to string my own sticks. I'd string sticks for teammates. I went to lacrosse camp up at Johns Hopkins during the summers. And of course, shattered countless windows in the back of my mom's house practicing my skills. I just couldn't get enough. And I went on to play lacrosse until I graduated Amherst College. Even took a trip up to an Ojibwa reservation one summer after graduating high school to teach lacrosse to young kids there. I enjoyed many successes on the field, both in high school and in college, and I made lifelong friends. But, and here's my point, perhaps the most valuable reward gifted to me by the game was a sense of belonging and ease within the privileged spaces that I would come to inhabit, these schools. Sure, there were challenges, academic and otherwise, emotional, because, you know, I'm an actor. Or at least I figured that out my junior year of college. But the game of lacrosse facilitated a kind of social acceptance and standing for me at these schools. It was a passport that helped open doors for me and allowed me to make myself at home, particularly in college. In those years, I was a bit of a curiosity. I was an oddity because I played lacrosse. I liked that. I didn't match preconceptions. In a way, it disarmed certain people. So I knew few boundaries in college. And as any student should, I felt free to explore. Of course, the years spent at a rigorous prep school aided me as well. A sociologist named Anthony Jack, also an Amherst grad, who went on to earn a PhD at Harvard, has studied the impact of attending elite colleges on American kids who may be first-generation college students and in some ways alien to such settings, like a good number of kids who were part of Harlem lacrosse. Jack wrote a book called The Privileged Poor, How Elite Colleges Are Failing Disadvantaged Students. Jack's research, spurred by his own experiences and observations while at Amherst, indicates that there are inhibitors in such places, some subtle, some not so subtle, that can diminish such students' capacity to enjoy the sense of belonging and genuine inclusion that allows success. He notes that when a graduate is handed a diploma at Amherst and at many other schools, that degree is conferred with all the rights and privileges pertaining thereto. That's a big idea for those who receive that, at least rhetorically. But it's one thing to be accepted into a school, it's not easy, and then it's another to thrive in it, particularly when it presents an entirely new environment with new rules, new social codes, and heightened expectations. Harlem Lacrosse's work at an even more critical time for the kids it serves, following the recent Supreme Court decision that works to reinforce a perpetual underclass. Harlem Lacrosse's work is preparing ambitious, gifted, but potentially vulnerable young people in ways centered on this game that we and they love, that empower them to access those rights and privileges pertaining thereto, just as most of us in this room were able to, and to succeed. It's good for these young people. It's good for their community, both at home and at the schools that will become their homes. And it's good for this country, so long as they don't all become actors. So how about a round of applause, please, for Harlem Lacrosse and for the young student athletes who benefit by it, and a round of applause for all of you for being here in support.